here, I think we can at least get started here and get some of the first part of the agenda going here. So let's get started for our Tuesday, February 2nd meeting. We'll do a roll call. Carla?
Sure. Chair Garitano,
Present.
Councilmember Bartolino,
Here.
Councilmember Brost, Councilmember Edens,
Here.
Councilmember Farmer, Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo,
Here.
Councilmember Remy.
And he is in the attendee list. So Rick, if you can add him on, he can then claim his presence.
I've done that.
There he is. He's joining.
Councilmember Remy.
Here.
Thank you.
There you go. Put your video on. We need video. We're roll call votes. All right, now he's there. Good. All right, we'll get started. Approval of the minutes for January 5th, 2021. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes made by Councilmember Remy, seconded by Councilmember Flasher? Any question on the minutes? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, the minutes are passed. Welcome, Larry. All right, do we have anyone for public participation? I don't see anyone on the attendee list. Not aware of any other.
I don't have anything.
All right, good. All right, we'll move on to Public Works. We have no items under for information, so we'll move right into 4 actions. So Rick, contractor bids for 2021 concrete street and sidewalk replacement project.
Thank you, Chair Garitano. As I think most of you are aware, every year we do solicit a project for replacement of substandard concrete streets and sidewalks throughout the city of Wildwood. For our budget in 2021, we had $800,000 budgeted allocated for concrete street replacement and another $100,000 allocated for the concrete sidewalk replacement for a total of $900,000. So over the past several years, we've combined these 2 projects, and that's what we've done for 2021. So we put out a bid. Recently, we opened bids on January 21st for the 2021 project. We did receive 6 bids from contractors. The lowest bid that we received was from Kelp Contracting. The amount was $855,750. The second low bid was Spencer Contracting. Their bid was at $878,000, just a little bit 25 plus above that, or 20,000 above. So with the bid, we are recommending authorizing a contractor moving forward with a contract with Kelp Contracting to complete the 2021 project at their low bid amount of $855,750. We are including another $10,000 for contingencies for additional work as identified by the department. So that is the recommendation to the committee tonight, is to move forward with the contract with Kelp Contracting, and I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Sure. Well, thanks, Rick. So before we get started, is there someone that wants to make a motion and put it on the floor? So Councilmember Edens, you've got your hand up. Motion, is that for the recommendation?
I'd like to make a motion to approve as recommended by the department for Kelp Contracting, the $855,750 with the contingency of $10,000.
Okay, is there a second on that? Second by Councilmember Flasher. Sorry, Larry, Councilmember Flasher. Dan got you first there. So we have a motion now on the floor. So let's open it up for discussion. Councilmember Remy, did you have your hand up for discussion?
Yeah, just about Kelp construction. If I remember correctly, last year there were some concerns about working with Kelp Constructions, if you guys remember correctly. Have those concerns been at least rectified? I think it came up in Parks and Planning, and Councilmember Mccutcheon may be familiar with what I'm talking about.
I have to tell you, I'm a little bit at a loss. We are actually looking forward to working with Kelp. Obviously, they're a local contractor, well-established. Tom's been in the business all his life, and it's been some time since they've had our contract. So we're actually looking forward to having them on board this year and working with Kelp. We've worked with them as a right-of-way maintenance contractor for years, and they've always performed very well for us.
Okay, perfect. Then if there's no issues, then that's fine. I just wanted to make sure. I remember last year's meeting, there was an issue. Perfect.
Councilmember Brost.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I'm real excited that Tom Kelp won. I mean, being a local business and knowing Tom, I mean, if we have an issue with him, he's the kind of guy that's going to be right there. So I'm really pleased with this. Thank you.
Totally agree with that. Don't see any other hands up, so we do have that motion. Seeing no other hands up, then all those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any oppose? Any abstain? All right, that motion passes. All right, moving on to the next item. We've got the contractor bids for the Evergreen Forest Curb Replacement Project. Rick.
Thank you, Chair. This was another bid the department put out during January. We do have a item in our budget for 2021 to start the replacement of the curbs in the Evergreen Forest subdivision. Evergreen Forest has asphalt curbs that are in poor condition, and so it's the desire to replace those curbs throughout the subdivision with concrete curbs, not asphalt as they currently are. So we did include $75,000 in our budget for this year to start that process. We envision it to occur over 2 years. So we'd have to budget a comparable amount again next year to finish the work up. We did open bids on January 28th and received quite a lot of interest. I was kind of surprised. We had 14 contractors submit bids for the project. The low bidder was from Foster's Concrete, just over $42,000, $42,159.78 to complete the work. The second low bidder was Krupp Construction for just under $54,000. So the department is recommending moving forward with a contract with Foster's Concrete Construction LLC to complete the project for the bid amount of $42,159.78. And we are also asking for another $5,000 contingency for additional work as identified by the department. So that is the recommendation. It will be well below our budgeted amount of $75,000 for 2021. I'm available for any questions that the committee members may have.
Sure. Before we open it up and see if there's a motion. Hey, Rick, just for clarity, Foster's, that sounds like a new name. I don't recall if we've ever worked with them. Do you know or have experience? And also, this is also kind of a unique request itself, right? Because we don't typically do curb work that I'm aware of like this.
We haven't had to do this. You're correct, council member. We don't have many subdivisions that are in this situation. This was a unique subdivision. Foster's Concrete is a new contractor for us, but they aren't actually. The gentleman who runs Foster's Concrete actually works for Westfall Contracting. So he's split out on his own and has bid this as a separate contractor. So he's actually done work for us through Westfall, who is one of our right-of-way maintenance contractors, and actually done some sidewalk for us last year. So we know the gentleman directly involved, and from that perspective, I think we're very comfortable with moving forward. But that's a good question, because it is not a name that we've seen in Wildwood for at least as long as I've been with the city.
All right. Let's see if we can get a motion on the floor if we're ready to have a motion. So Councilmember Brost, is that a motion for the recommendation?
Well, I just got a question. Being that it's somebody who is going to be out on his own, Rick, do you know that he has the necessary equipment?
I don't have any reason to believe that they'll have any problems given the scope of the work. It's not a large project, and from what I've gathered talking to my guys, they spoke very highly of him, and they feel he's very capable and can get the job done.
If you could just to put my mind at ease, because I've ran into these situations before, but I would just ask if you could make sure he has the necessary equipment, because particularly with asphalt, if you don't have the equipment, you're going to have a problem.
These are cement.
Understood, and we can do that. And again, they're going to replace the asphalt curbs with concrete.
Cement, yeah.
Like concrete,
Okay.
but I can certainly check on that.
All right. Thank you.
All right, I've got a couple of hands up. So we've got Councilman McCutcheon and Remy and Bertolino. So McCutcheon, you're up.
Now, Rick, have you ever seen any of his work?
As I was alluding to, he has worked for Westfall, and they have done sidewalk work for us last year. So yes, our guys have worked with him, and we're very happy with the sidewalk work that he did for us last year.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Councilmember Remy.
Actually, I just have a question at the very end after we get a motion on this. Just what happens to the remaining amount of money and whether or not that could be applied to the tree restoration.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Unless, I mean, that's, I think, fine if you want to get that question answered now, it's fine with me.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, if we're under budget and we've got remaining $30,000, is that, and then within the purview that in this calendar year, we can apply those difference of funds to restore some of the trees that we were going to do this year?
I think that'd be Rick, Department of Public Works, right? You want to go ahead?
Yes, and certainly we would have that opportunity. And usually at mid-year, we do look at those things. So we could certainly reallocate that overage to another item, such as the tree budget, and use it for that purpose. I'd have to double check in this particular situation. The only thing that's concerning me about that is that these monies are in the road and bridge fund, whereas the tree planting is not. So that might be the one issue there that would prevent that from occurring.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Bertolino, and then McCutcheon, I see your hand up. We'll come
Yeah,
back.
I will make a motion that we accept the bid as proposed. And I'd like to have after the second, I have a question also.
Okay, is there a second on that? Councilmember Edens, seconded. All right, Dave.
Yeah, Rick, in our agreement with the subdivision, were any subdivision HOA funds applied here, or did they satisfy their requirements when we did the private street to public street transaction?
They applied, these are all city funds. They did, if you recall at that time, they did write us a check. So essentially some of this cost is being covered in that regard. But this will all be paid directly out of this budget. And then they want to also complete sidewalk work that they're responsible for. So we did include that in this bid. So they have a price from Foster's to do the sidewalk work as well, and that'll be essentially at their discretion.
And they've accepted that contract with Foster? Or a contract with Foster?
The HOA, well, they've just been notified of it, so they haven't moved forward as we haven't either. But I would expect that discussion to occur in the coming weeks.
Okay, did I hear you correctly that the HOA does have a bid from Foster to do the sidewalk work? Is that what I heard you say?
That's correct. We incorporated that into our bid. So they provided a price to do the quantities, the identified sidewalk work that the HOA wants done. And they provided that unit price with our bid, and we forwarded that to the HOA for their consideration. So
Okay,
I expect them to move forward with it.
thank you.
All right, Councilmember McCutcheon.
Yeah, so Rick, if there's overage, can't we go ahead and apply that? I know this is going to be a 2-year project, if that's correct. Can't we go ahead and apply that overage to maybe partial work for the second year? Go ahead and get some of that started, so there's more of the projects completed than what it would take for him to do it in 2 years?
Yes, ma'am, we could certainly do that. I guess looking at the overall amount of work, I didn't think we could get it all done this year. So I felt like it didn't achieve a lot necessarily to do 80% of the work and come back and do the last 20%, say, next year. But we could certainly look at spending down the whole budget And that is a discussion we could have with the subdivision HOA as well to see if they're in favor of that. Just moving forward potentially and using the entire budget for this year and then coming back and doing the remainder next year, assuming it is budgeted for work.
That, I think that's probably going to be the preference. I've had multiple conversations with them, and I know they're anxious to get the work completed. So if you'd look into that, I greatly appreciate it.
I could certainly, yeah, we could certainly follow up with the HOA. I have not had that discussion relative to that point yet. If we decide to go that way, we would have to make a change to my recommendation to reflect that, obviously.
All right. Any other hands or any other questions? Okay. Rick, you mentioned something about having to put in a change. Is it not just something that just can come back for like authorization again from this committee if this work gets done early to just proceed with the next component if it's still in this year?
Chair Gaetano, I think that could certainly be the case. We could move forward as is and then look to amend the agreement at a later date this spring potentially, just to keep things moving if that's the desire and the HOA is agreeable. I'm sure we could supplement the contract at the amount that's recommended currently if everyone's agreeable with doing that.
Okay. Is that anyone else have a different opinion? Otherwise, we got a motion on the floor and we'll just go ahead and vote on this motion. All right, Councilmember Edens.
I would just say that, let's look at it mid-year too, because in case we have extra costs and we try to balance the budget and we're pretty tight, then we'll know if we have it. We might end up with something else over in the road and bridge fund. So I'm willing to keep an open mind and apply it towards next year's project scope, but just because we get it back doesn't mean we have to spend it either this year.
All right. All right. Motion is on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, the motion passes. Good. Next item we have is the proposed installation of a sidewalk under drain system. Rick?
For me. Thank you, Chair Gaetano. This last item is a result of some resident concerns that we've received in a couple locations relative to sidewalk conditions. If you read the memo, there's a couple spots, and I don't mean to infer that these are the only locations either, frankly, but we do struggle with locations that stormwater or groundwater seeps out over to sidewalks and results in situations where the sidewalk is wet and might get deposits of mud or other debris and essentially make it a little difficult to walk on, slippery, hazardous for residents to use those sidewalks. So we've provided a couple locations in my memo if you'd had a chance to read it. One was on Palm Grover Loop Road, on the north side of Palm Grover Loop Road, just east of Route 109. And I provided some photographs in the memo that kind of illustrate the issue there, with the water essentially seeping out of the hillside or stormwater coming off the hillside, collecting on the sidewalk, and just making kind of a nuisance condition and sometimes a hazardous condition. But we also have a similar, but not exactly the same situation at Crown Point Estates subdivision. We have several homes in that subdivision where the groundwater is very high, in my opinion, and they suffer from sump pumps that run continuously to try to discharge the water away from their homes. Some of them have installed French drains on their properties, and the water basically leaks over the sidewalk or onto the road. Since it's running continuously nearly, it tends to grow algae sometimes, can be slippery and a nuisance, and it's just something that we have a difficulty dealing with. In most cases, when we get complaints about these situations, we'll go out and we'll power wash the sidewalk. to try to clean it up, but that only addresses the problem for a short period of time. It usually reoccurs. So what we're proposing is to look at a solution that might be permanent to address the problem. Essentially, it would be installing a French drain or an under drain along the edge of the sidewalk or underneath the sidewalk to try to capture some of that water, keep it from flowing over the sidewalk and making the sidewalk slick or muddy. So what we're recommending tonight is to start with the Palm Grover Loop Road sidewalk itself is kind of the trial run, and design what I call an under drain. It's really would be a French drain similar to what you might install in your own backyard. Essentially, it would be a pipe that's underground, a slotted pipe that's wrapped in clean rock in a geotextile fabric that allows that water to infiltrate it, run down the pipe, and then it discharges in the nearest storm sewer and takes that water away. So both these locations would require us to discharge into an adjacent storm sewer. So that obviously triggers the need for us to coordinate with MSD and get a permit with MSD to allow that to happen, which makes it a little more complicated. But I think with some surveying and a little bit of engineering, we can put a plan together, present it to MSD, and I'm confident that we'll be able to get a permit through them. So that's what we're proposing tonight, is to start designing a solution for the Palm Grover Parkway location. It's about almost 500 foot of sidewalk. Our rough estimate of cost to construct it would be on the order of $19,000 to $28,500. That's roughly what we're looking at, we think. Hopefully it'll be less. There will be some engineering fees on top of that to design it. But I would expect that the engineering would be less than $10,000. We would have to have a surveyor go out and pick up the topography, locate utilities, and then look at existing right-of-way locations and determine if we need easements from adjacent property owners or the HOA. So there could be the need to acquire easements as well. So that's the recommendation tonight. If approved by the committee, we'd like to move forward, and we would solicit for an engineering proposal from an engineer. And if it's less than $10,000, what I'm recommending is the city administrator would sign that agreement and we would move forward with the engineering. If it's greater than 10,000, then I'd have to bring it back to this committee for subsequent approval for the engineering. So with that, I'll turn it back, and I'll certainly be available for any questions you may have.
Okay, same question. If we're ready to make a motion, that'd be great, just to get discussion going. I see two hands up, so let's see if we're there yet or not. But Councilmember Berlino, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, I'd like to make the motion that we approve the monies for the design.
Okay, so we have a motion being made. Is there a second? And then we'll open up for discussion. Councilmember Farmer, you're a second. All right, so let's have discussion on it. Councilmember Flasher and then Brost.
So the picture that you sent, is that basically how bad it gets typically, or is that like a not so bad day? Because to me, this sounds like it's opening a can of worms for every street in my neighborhood to want to get their sidewalks fixed. I mean, I can find 5 places on the path that I walk that are at least this bad, if not worse. And it's going to be really expensive if we start just saying yes to all the stuff. So my opinion is this is a dangerous slope that we're starting. That's why I asked. But if it gets way worse than that, then maybe I can be corrected there.
Well, when I've seen it, it's been very, very inundated with water enough that you really couldn't use it. And I guess this location would, in my mind, be a higher priority because of the amount of usage it gets with all the neighborhoods and the folks wanting to get to the trail system and the park potentially. So as I mentioned earlier, this is by far, and I know there's other locations out there. Now they may not be as high a priority, and we'd certainly have to look at that very issue. Is if we start down this road, do we want to do it everywhere? I don't know that we would, but then again, if we can come up with a cost-effective solution that eliminates the need to go out there and clean it, power wash it, deal with, would address any liability concerns, quite frankly. I'd like to be able to do it, frankly, and address these areas. And we've struggled with them in the past, and this would give us a way to potentially address them.
All right, got a couple names here. So council members Bros, Bertolino, Farmer, and Remy, and Edens too. So let's start with Councilmember Bros.
Yeah, I think this is an example of an item that we should postpone till we get our priorities set and finalized. This is looking like a $50,000 project, and my guess is, and when it's done, it wouldn't work. Having a sidewalk with water on it is one thing. Out where I live, we don't even have sidewalks, so I'd be happy with a sidewalk. So I don't know, Chair Garitano, my point would be is we just postpone this. We need to get our priorities set up, because I think, as Dan mentioned, we have this all over the place. And we're talking, let's just call it in my game, we're talking 30,000 plus engineering, plus we don't even know if we're going to need easements. And by the end of the day, who knows what this is going to cost. And let's get our priorities finalized and see if somewhere in the vicinity of 50,000 for Pond Grover Parkway sidewalk is worth it. Looking at the picture, I think you got a landscape issue more than a sidewalk issue. So, but I'm not going to vote in favor of this now, because I think it's premature and we need to get our priorities set. So do I make a motion, Joe, to postpone? Is that what I do?
Yeah, if you make a motion to postpone, and then we'll have discussion on that. Folks want to support it or go against it, and then if that postpone passes, then the item's just postponed. So you make
I would make a motion to postpone till we've been kicking around priorities for a while. It's time to get it done, but maybe 30 days. I don't know how long, but say 30 days.
Okay, we could do that, and then we can always revisit and see where we're at. So you got a motion to postpone and seconded, I'm assuming, by Councilmember Flasher. So we're talking about postponement. I'll go through the list here. So Councilmember Bertolino, you're up next.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate what you're saying, Larry. I think if it wasn't in my ward, and if I didn't walk that street every day with my dog, I'd have a different opinion. But it is a safety issue. People, myself included, have almost done a header on that street in the midsummer, because it gets covered over with scum and so on, and it's very slick. And unfortunately, either side of that sidewalk is inundated with water almost all year round. There might be even a spring down there someplace. I'm sure they're like sidewalks in other wards, but this one is used almost every day by lots of people. I think it is a safety hazard as well as just an aesthetics problem. I think the engineering costs, and I agree with you, Larry, I'm not sure what the answer is here. This is a tough terrain. You've got a steep slope of coming down to the sidewalk. I don't know really how we're going to engineer this thing so that we can divert the water. I'd like to go ahead with the engineering design work just to get an answer, and then decide after we get an answer as to what the fix is. Let's decide on whether we want to spend the money now or not for the fix.
All right. So Councilmember Bertolino, you made your comment there. I got you, Larry, on the list here. So Councilmember Farmer, you're up.
Yeah, I mean, so that isn't my ward, but I do walk it every day. And I actually agree with both you guys. Like, I think we do need to for sure get our story straight, and not being an expert in concrete, I have a feeling that fix is going to be much larger than $10,000, but it is dangerous, like dangerous all year round. It doesn't, I know it's there, and I've still I've wiped out pretty good a couple times. I mean, there is like tadpoles and all kinds of stuff that lives in the water sitting on those sidewalks. It is real wet. So I'm sure that exists in other places, but it's not just like, I mean, I've looked and tried to figure out, is it somebody draining a pool or a hot tub or whatever? And I'm of the opinion, I think it is probably a spring, which would create a much larger issue for us to fix. But it is well-traveled and super dangerous. So I think we got to get something on the books to get that fixed sooner rather than later.
All right, Councilman Remy.
Yeah, I agree with what was just said, actually. But I actually agree with postponement. I think that this is probably creating a slippery slope. I think that we're going to find these same locations all throughout the entire city at a lot of different places. And, you know, I'm not opposed to tackling these, but I want to agree with what Councilmember Bros said. And I would actually consider if the council member wants to extend the postponement for more than 30 days. I know in 30 days, we're not going to have any prioritization. We're only just touching that right now. And I want to make sure that we get this correct because first of all, I'm not negating that this may be a project that we want to take on. I think the difficulty that we're facing is that all of these $50,000 or $120,000 for a cul-de-sac addition this year, or some of these things, they all add up. And I think, unfortunately, when you add up all of these little projects, you start to get to a situation where, in fact, you could actually pay for larger projects that probably have more immediate need than perhaps. And I'm not saying that this isn't one, but I'd really like to come better up with a matrix that we can prioritize our plans. So if Councilmember Bros doesn't want to postpone for longer than 30 days, I'm happy to amend to get to at least 60 days so that the city, including the city administrator Cross and the mayor, as we've been working through prioritization, that we could develop a better scheme to approach these problems.
All right. Councilmember Edens or Councilmember Bros, would you, I can come back to you. I got you on the list if you want to amend it or something like that. So Councilmember
I'm
Edens,
good
no.
with what Ken said.
Councilmember Edens.
Yes, I'd like to speak in favor of the postponement. And I do have a couple of questions. But first a statement. It's not that I don't recognize it as an issue. It's that I've also walked in your ward, Councilmember Bernalino and Councilmember Farmer, and in my ward. And the last time I went for a walk, I tripped and almost fell on my face. But it wasn't a water issue. So what I'm seeing around the city is significant issues with buckling, with tree roots, with peaks where you can't drive a stroller through. So I'm wondering, even though this is sludge where you can fall, why is the sludge ranked higher than replacements of other slabs? I have had trustees complain because they had to wait on a list to get their sidewalk slab replaced where a peak had happened due to tree roots. They missed that year. They expected it the next year. They were told it was postponed again. It got ground down and never replaced. So I just would like to learn more information as we prioritize why some things that everything's clearly a safety discussion, why this is worse than other tripping hazards and cracked areas or wet areas. My second question is, I understand this is different because it's water 24/7. My question is, in addition to the runoff and drainage, are there also sprinklers that are turned on for a good portion of the year directly onto the sidewalk? In other areas that happens, it evaporates fairly quickly, although it's a nuisance if you're walking or with a pet or with a stroller. I just want to know, are there additional issues that the homeowners need to address at the same time? My other question is, and I know it wouldn't look as aesthetically pleasing because we all have concrete, could we replace this entire section with the impervious concrete that we used on the Manchester streetscape rather than the cost of a drain? Is that a cheaper solution, Rick? And is that a more environmentally friendly solution?
So actually, Council Member, that is one of the things we want to look at is essentially following the model on Manchester Road and possibly implementing a very similar fix. And that's kind of where we came up with the upper end of the cost estimates from. So yeah, that would be one possible solution. I don't know if we're convinced we need to go so far as doing the pervious concrete, but
okay.
I think that would address it.
I saw the estimate for the drain. I just didn't know if it was either or. So it could just be the concrete replaced with a new material versus a drain.
Well, the permeable concrete on the Manchester Road project actually incorporates a drain within it. So it has a geotextile fabric with clean stone and a drain in the center of the clean stone, the bottom of it, and that drain actually ties into storm sewers, or it discharges at another location. So it's a very similar idea that I think we could tweak and utilize on a project like this if we chose to do that. As far as trip hazards, those are a priority. When we receive notice of them, we usually will grind them initially and then come back potentially and replace later. But if we're made aware of it, it's certainly our thought process is to address those as soon as possible. So if you have any concerns in that regard, let us know right away and we'll make sure they get addressed. But those should be higher priority, and we should be addressing those when we're made aware of them. And I guess the last comment you made about sprinkler systems. Yeah, these are difficult, and in some cases they're very difficult locations to assess the problems. Where is the water coming from? There are frequently irrigation systems that have been installed in close proximity. So that's always one of the first questions that we have is this water from an irrigation system or from a water main or any kind of a water line? And we try to look into that as best we can. In some cases, it's very hard to determine the exact cause of the water. We do get it tested frequently from Missouri American to see if it's potable, to see if by chance it is a water main, and we pull them into the problem solving to see if they would assure us that it is not from one of their facilities. But it is something we look at.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is, I know you mentioned that the location number 2 and 3 in Crown Point Estates you felt was worse than the Pond Grover Parkway locations, if I understood you correctly. But there was not a picture in the attachment of the sidewalk condition. I think that would help me understand severity.
It was.
You said there was, Dave? I'm not seeing it.
Of Pond Grover Parkway?
No, I'm asking for a picture of Crown Point Estates, which is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, that's okay. So I agree that there's an issue on Pond Grover. I'm just feel that it's similar to other areas of the city. I would be interested to know how much worse Crown Point Estates is. So when you come back to us, I would love to see that. Thank you.
Larry, you're up, or is this related to the motion, the amendment?
Well, I mean, related to the postponement is just that, my point is that we really need to finalize priorities, because we're talking here about one item and the importance of that versus, someone taking a left-hand turn when you got a car coming at you going 60 miles an hour. So we've got to put these things in perspective. And I think the perspective is in process, and we got to give it a little bit of time. Plus, the more I listen to what's being discussed here, we really don't know what to do. And we don't know what the cost is. And that is not a good basis for approval. So but regardless of that, let's get the priority set. Let's see where this falls in that line. And where is this in relation to other safety issues? And that's, because safety issues are high for all of us, but where is this in the chain of all of them? So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add a quick comment to it. I was actually surprised when I saw this come up on the agenda, because I know I've heard about it. Lauren with Crown Point Estates, that whole area has got a lot of water, and there's an email chain that goes back like 2-3 years that Rick's probably very familiar with, and it's pretty much water all the time there. But I think, yeah, I'm fine with the postponement, just to get us to the point where we prioritize. But, I think too, Rick, what might be helpful for the committee is maybe understanding like what you're having to do in the interim, like every time you get Glenn Daly to go out and pressure wash, what does that cost? So that we can try to weigh between continuing to mitigate the issues now, trying to pressure wash these sidewalks, and if a permanent solution will save us money in the long run. But again, to Larry's point, I don't think we even know yet what the permanent solution is. So I get you're trying to do some design work to figure it out. All right, so we've got a motion and we have an amendment. I just want to make sure we are clear on the amendment because we had talked about 30 days. Was there an intent to change that to at completion, after completion of the prioritization process, or no sooner than 30 days? If you want to just modify that, I know that there was some talk around it, so I'll entertain that. Oh, and then Councilmember McCutcheon, you got your hand up?
Yep. Thank you for letting me speak. So I just want to address a couple of things that were said. This is obviously a priority. It's been in the planning for multiple years. This has been an ongoing issue. There is not a sprinkler system right there. We do believe that there is an underground stream, and it is, like everybody said, it is dangerous. Yes, everybody has safety concerns in their ward. That's true. But this is a project that was discussed previously. It was supported previously. And so we really need to address this sooner than later. I don't have a problem with Rick looking into it a little bit more. I don't really have a postponement for 30 days, but I think this is a project we need to take seriously. We do need to put resident safety first, I think, before anything else. We have several projects coming up in several different areas that are also related to safety. This isn't something that's just popped up. It's been there for quite a number of years, and a lot of complaints by residents and a lot of residents who have trips, fell, whatever. So thank you.
All right, we got the motion to postpone. So let me make sure, maker and second of the motion, do you want to modify that, like to postpone to after completion of the prioritization process?
I mean, I think that would provide the most clarity if we did that.
Okay, it sounded like that was the intent. All right, so Larry and Dan are in agreement there. So we've got this motion to postpone right now. All right, all those in favor of the motion to postpone? Say aye.
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 All right, any opposed?
Opposed?
Okay, got one opposed that I see, Dave. Any abstain? All right, so the motion to postpone passes. So we'll be revisiting this item after completion of prioritization. All right, moving on next. We've got a couple for information on items under administration. So the first one is the item of elected or appointed officials paying for records requests. Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's actually 3 items under for information, and we'll discuss each one of those individually. The first item, elected appointed officials paying for records requests. As those of you who have been on the committee for a while know, this has been on the agenda for quite some time, down under not ready for action, either high priority, low priority, medium priority. This item stems from a period of time when a lot of you were not on council, and there were a lot of requests being made by council members to the city clerk to gather records, and repeated requests, and it really started to get out of hand. The mayor had a conversation with us in terms of, to try to make the requests appropriate and go through the proper channels to treat those requests as we would any other request for information from anyone. And so there's a request made through proper channels to the city clerk, and information is gathered. If it appears that it's going to entail more than a de minimis amount of time, and by that I mean 10 minutes or less, there is no charge to gather that information. But anything beyond that, we try to provide an estimate to the requester of what it will take, and then give that requester an opportunity to either narrow the scope of the request or to pay for it upfront before we pull the information. And the mayor does feel that council members, now in the course of your duties, in terms, if there's information that you need to do something, that falls outside the scope of what we're talking about here. But I recently had a request from a sitting council member looking for information that was not related to anything that was that the council is addressing right now. And after repeated attempts of trying to get that information through me, I said, no, we need to go through proper channels, at which point there was no further request. So this is just, so it's under for information just to give you all some background information to decide that if we want to, put this for action at a future committee meeting, if it's something that you all want to take up and bring this to a conclusion and have something come out of this committee that in fact that's the direction we're going to go. So this is just to kind of tee this up and let you all discuss it if you'd like tonight, or or put it on a future agenda.
All right. We've got Councilman Rambo. I did see your hand up. Is that still from before, or is this for now? And then I'll have you, Larry.
Yeah, I put it up at the beginning of the sidewalk discussion, so that ship has sailed. I should
All right.
put it down.
Your hand somehow likes to just kind of disappear.
It's
Yeah, I
still
don't know
up
what
there.
it is about me,
Delayed.
Joe, but I apologize if I've offended you in a past life or something.
All right, Councilmember Brost, you're up then.
Yeah, I guess, Steve, my opinion on it is I think people's time is very valuable. And if there's a request that's not within the scope of us doing our city council work, I think there should be a charge. I mean, one of the things I think we have to be very cognizant at with, whether we have a large staff or a small staff, is always valuing their time and not creating work. I mean, that's a sin. So I would say charge, and whatever the highest amount you can charge it. So, and if it's that important to me, I'll pay it.
And regarding the charge, and thank you, Councilmember Brost. The way we do that is when we do need to pull records for a request made through the city clerk, we typically charge and it typically would fall maybe to the deputy city clerk or something like that, in which case we would charge the hourly rate, not a burdened rate, just a straight hourly rate. And then if it's a request maybe through Rick's department or Joe Vunich's department, typically it would be at a lower level hourly rate for that. And this would mean if the time spent exceeded a de minimis amount, that being quantified at about 10 minutes or so beyond that. Now, there are times, however, where somebody it may require Rick's involvement, in which case the charge is going to be higher. So we had, just today, as a matter of fact, at our department head meeting this morning, we've had someone who was looking for some significant amount of records, and we had a discussion, and we told that person, hey, given the scope of what you're asking for, that charge is going to be $400. In which case you pay that up front before we ever pull a single record. Now, so, but so Mr. Brost, I wanted to say that it is at a clerical rate, typically, like I say, the deputy city clerk or something along those lines. But so unless there's just a huge involvement of time.
What is that hourly rate?
Depends on who's pulling the records. So
give a range.
Could be $20 an hour, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, that's pretty low.
Per the sunshine law, I know that they are supposed to base it off the lowest hourly rate that can do the work.
Right.
Yeah, so that might be something too. We want to make sure we're aligned with the law, because otherwise someone would feel they might be treated differently.
Right.
But again, just for information, so any questions or anything, it sounds like there's interest to bring it back and then have a draft before us as a policy type change or addition. Councilmember Eden, you got your hand up.
Yes, we do have a different administrative team than we did in the past. So my question is, if we're following the rules that you've put forward, do we need a policy like this, or is it superfluous?
I didn't catch the last part. You said, do we need a policy, and I didn't hear.
Is it superfluous at this point, because you're already kind of creating a level playing field and holding our feet to the fire, so to speak. So is this actually necessary now that we seem to have better implementation?
I will defer to City Attorney Young. I don't know if we need, well, maybe we need a policy. I don't know if we actually have something in writing as it relates to elected and appointed officials. And so I'd like his opinion if we actually need some legislation to do that, in which case we would prepare that and come back to the committee. So
let me restate my question. Was the problem not following the rule, or the problem was that we didn't have a rule?
I don't think that we necessarily had a rule, as it's my recollection that we don't have such a rule.
Right. So with the absence of rules, someone can make the opposite argument too.
Would that be okay? City Attorney Young. Okay.
Yeah, let City Attorney Young opine on it. I think he's on here.
Well, and I, to what the chairman just said, and thank you, that has happened in the past. And let me start talking just in my general experience with multiple cities. This is not an uncommon thing in cities. And the reason for it is multifaceted, but one of the most important things is it's about a protection of city employees. There are numerous instances where I have seen it, not necessarily in Wildwood, but I've seen it where an elected official asks for a multitude of records with the expectation that they would be provided without cost, and then end up using them for their election, for political purposes, and arguably that employee, by doing that, violated ordinances, charters, or statutes that prohibit the use of city resources for those purposes. So if there's a policy that says they're not allowed to do it, they are protected from the pressure to do it and potentially and inadvertently violating those laws. That's, to me, the most important reason for having that policy in place, is that it is clear cut on its face. In one of the cities I represent, they have an ordinance that says, here's what you're allowed to ask for, here's what staff you're allowed to use. And I'll bring those forward at the next meeting to give you examples of what they say. But I do think it is important to have, if for any other reason, to protect the city staff and employees.
Excellent reasoning, and that's good enough for me. So do we need a formal motion to recommend that you come back with this? But
No action on this. It's for information, but I think given the feedback we've heard, we'll bring it back.
Right.
Thank you.
And,
all right, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll take this as direction to bring forward something at the next meeting.
Yes, thank you. All right, next item.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me start with my apologies to the committee. I had actually intended to, as an attachment to the agenda, our sales tax receipt schedule, and forgot to do so. So I will email it out to all of you tomorrow. But in the meantime, I'd like to just share with you a couple numbers here. For the year 2020, there is a 2-month lag in terms of when we receive the funds from St. Louis County from the pool tax from the month that it is applied. So in January of 2021, we received the funds for November of 2020. So what I'd like to just point out, and again, I apologize for not including the graph, just escaped me, but so if we look at a cumulative 2020 through November, we are, these numbers are a little small here. So we're about 10% below the budget for the month, but we did a end of the year budget adjustment as you know, because we were down significantly in sales tax, all related to the pandemic. So we're only, actually, we are just about even with the amended budget, with our sales tax revenues, which through November are $4,349,000. So about $4.4 million versus a budget of about the same, a cumulative budget, 4.3 versus 4.3. So $18,000 difference on a cumulative basis. But again, let me reiterate that budget, it was amended, as you all know, that you approved back in November, the amended 2020 budget. We're still, we're still running significantly under where we should be on sales tax revenues from the 1% pool tax. But the 2021 budget reflects that. So I will email this graph. There's a bar graph as well as these numbers cumulatively showing 2020, 2019, actually all the way back to 2014. So it'll be good information for you to see, how those numbers have trended down recently in 2020. And as I say, will continue. So, but I will email this all to you tomorrow. And then feel free to ask any questions once you see that. And my apologies for not including it in tonight's package.
Okay, no problem. A quick question, that 10%, was that the total revenue decline for the year, or is that just the sales tax?
That is sales tax only, and it is only for the month of November.
Oh, okay.
November compared to budget. So that's not cumulatively through the first 11 months of the year. It's basically a wash. But
oh, good.
It's a wash simply because, remember, we modified the budget. We amended the budget in November, so we pretty much knew everything. So you would expect that number to be pretty much dead on because we knew 11 out of the 12 months at that point in time, or just about.
Well, just because I was questioning that, because at the Muni League meeting, they mentioned that the sales tax, the 1% for the year for 2020 was down 4.4%.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, better than I think most folks thought.
Yeah, we're doing a little bit better.
All right. Any other questions on the item? Otherwise, Steve will send it out. Councilman Remy?
Yeah, so Mr. Cross, just a quick question for you. So I think we're supposed to get our census data on March 31st, 2021. Any ideas of what that's going to look like for this area and how that may impact our revenue?
No, I don't. And the information that I have, Councilmember Remy, is that it may be a little bit later than the end of March before those numbers. We're expecting that to come midsummer is the information that's coming to me. So we have a couple months, I think, if the information I'm getting is correct, sir, before we're going to have an idea of what the 2020 census looks like. So right now, your guess is as good as mine. Your guess is probably better than mine.
Well, the pool tax formula does factor in population. So therefore, assuming that population growth is continuing, which Ward 8 will probably contribute a lot to that, we will probably see an increase in the pool tax coming.
And not only that, but if our census shows that we exceed 40,000, we get to have 2 more council members on the council. How about that?
What, in the 9th ward?
Exactly. That'll give us another ward. So if you think it's crazy now with 16, wait till there's 18.
So Chair Gaetano, though, to your point, though, I think you bring up I know in facetious jest here, you tell us this, but when we do get that census data this calendar year, will we be redrawing the current ward lines? So Councilmember Gaetano may find that he's in Ward 7, not Ward 8. Is that possible?
It is absolutely possible. Once we see those numbers, and in fact, I had a conversation about a week and a half ago with an ex-council member that some of you may know. I don't know why I just had
Harry.
Harry LeMay. So some of you know Harry LeMay, and Harry LeMay was involved in the redrawing, if you will, of the wards back from the 2010, and called me and offered his assistance along with others should we get to that point. and probably will get to the point when this information becomes available midsummer or so. So there very well could be some changes. Councilmember Remy.
Yeah.
So
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I just wanted to Chair Garitano to realize that
Nah,
Ward 8 may longer be his.
I'm right in the heart of it. You in the periphery might have to rethink that. All right. Anyway, let's proceed. Let's see where we are. You got one more item on the list. The number 3, the refund of the 2020 and suspension of the 2021 liquor license fee.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of you may or may not be aware that the mayor has asked for this topic to be on the work session for this coming Monday night's council meeting. And it is therefore on that, and you probably, many of you, if not all of you, are aware that this was something that started with Mayor Flowers in Eureka. And then he basically sent out an email to all his peers in the surrounding municipalities to refund the 2020 liquor license fees and then suspend for 2021. So this will be discussed with you all, but the mayor does have it on the agenda. So we don't need to go into too much, but I will, and you all are really the first recipients of this. The impact of that refunding of 2020 and the projected license fees, and we have 13 establishments in the city of Wildwood that have liquor licenses that we would refund and suspend for 2021. That total amount would be in the neighborhood of about $18,000. But again, that will be discussed at work session on Mondays. But so I was just, Chair Garitano just thought it might be a good idea just to give you all a heads up about that. So you have been forewarned.
All right. Thank you. All right. We've got 3 more items under for action in the administration section here. So let's dive right into these. The first one, the council meeting start time.
Okay. I'll kick it off and then, but this goes to City Attorney Young. But we may have talked about it at a prior meeting and said that it would be on the agenda, but the mayor had indicated that this is hard coded in either the city code or the city charter, and I'm not sure which, but City Attorney Young will correct me. But it's in the code in terms of the start time, which is 7 p.m. for council meetings. And it's hardwired, if you will, in that. And I think we're about one of the only municipalities, certainly that City Attorney Young is involved to have it that way. So the mayor has asked us to look into it and see how we can build in some flexibility so that the council meetings can start earlier, depending on the agenda on the work session and so forth. So at that point, City Attorney Young was asked to draft some legislation, and what you have before you is the result of that work. So I'll let City Attorney Young take it from here, please.
Thank you, Mr. City Administrator. Before you, I have proposed amendments to the charter, or one amendment to the charter, and then proposed legislation consistent therewith. The request was to leave an open-ended authority to establish meeting times, and that is what has been done in the proposed revision to section 3.8 of the charter, specifically just by deleting the language that is in black and struck through, or bolded and struck through in the memo before you, the language nor scheduled prior to 7 p.m. local time except for work sessions at which no legislative action shall be taken. I went ahead and just took that language out. And then in the regular meetings provision in the city code, I'm proposing amended language that takes out the 7:30 start time, allows for greater flexibility for the start time of the regular meeting, so long that I put that doesn't start till after 6 p.m. because I believe that is consistent with what was desired here. but that the work session could start at some other earlier time, which again is consistent with what I understood the desire to be. Obviously, with the ordinance itself, you can be as vague or specific as you want it to be, but I, on the council meeting start time, opted for some specificity, but with less specificity for the work session, which is consistent with what exists now. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
All right, thanks, John, for that. And again, just a reminder that we still always follow the sunshine law. So postings will be made 24 hours indicating the time of a meeting. So it's impossible, or at least not in accordance with the sunshine law, to change meeting times less than 24 hours. So we have this here. So either we can see if we can get a motion to approve this language, which would then be forwarded to council, or if we're not ready for a motion, if you got any questions. Councilmember Flasher, and then
I'll make the motion to approve this.
okay, and then I saw Councilmember Remy got his hand up before Bertolino and Rambo. So is that a motion, a second?
No, actually myself, Lauren Edens, and Bertolino all had our hands up before all of that to talk about this.
Okay.
Good luck.
So what's that? All right. So
said good luck.
if we want to have, if we're not ready to have a motion on the floor to have discussion, we can come back to that. I only saw one motion made. I don't know if there's a second, but maybe we'll have to get some discussion first. All right, so seeing the list on the right side here, I'm just going to go in order. We got Remy, Edens, and Bertolino.
Councilman Chair Garitano, it looked like Councilmember Rambo was in fact seconding that motion.
Councilmember Rambo, was that? All right, well, if we can entertain then the motion on the floor and then we'll have discussion, then we do have a motion made by Councilmember Flasher, second by Rambo. So with that, maker second, if you have anything, otherwise we'll proceed with opening up for discussion. All right, so I've got Remy, Edens, and Bertolino. Remy?
No, thank you. So just one quick question. So if in fact we were to have a work session that was at like 6 o'clock or 5:30 and finished early, would we be starting the city council meeting then earlier as well? No. Okay. Just wanted to make sure that that was the case. So I'm not in support of this. I actually like having the 7 o'clock start time for the city council meeting. I think in part, and I can't speak for what happened 20 years ago, but for many of us that work downtown, it's really difficult to get here back all the way to the far reaches of the West County here. And so I really don't think it's appropriate to move it any earlier than it currently is, because I think it affords many of us the ability to not only try to make that work session, but certainly be able to try to make the council meeting. And so I'm not in support of actually having this flexibility. I think the way that it's blocked out is actually appropriate, and I wouldn't want to move it any earlier. And so I'm not in support.
Councilmember Remy, you'd asked the question about the flexibility, and what I can do is just share the conversation that the mayor had with me when he first started talking about this. It was his hope that if we have a work session at 6 o'clock, and I don't believe that it was his intention to start the work sessions any earlier than 6, but I think it was his hope that if we have a very short agenda on the work session, which obviously of late that has not been the case. In fact, we have way too many things on there and barely get through. But if we had a really short work session, and let's just say, and we knew it was going to be short, and it might only be a 20-minute, then, and if we knew that, and as Chair Garitano pointed out, we have to post this 24 hours, but then we would say that the general session would start at 6:30 if the mayor believed that we would really be able to get through that agenda quickly, rather than waiting until 7. So that I believe that was his intention anyway.
I appreciate that clarification, because that is exactly one of the things that I test in somewhat fear, is that then if that's the case, then we're going to start the main meeting at 6:30, which for many of us coming from downtown may be somewhat difficult at times depending on traffic. And I'd hate to actually miss the main meeting while sitting in traffic during that time frame. Number two is, to be honest with you, I think that we've unearthed a significant need at this point for development of prioritization that I think is going to take a fair amount of time. And so I do not foresee that any of our work sessions are going to be short. In fact, I would argue that if we're creating the agenda for the work sessions and they're going to be short, that we should always include at least some portion that's going to continue to chip away from some of these issues about developing matrices that we can utilize to develop prioritization for a number of the projects. So that's why I'm not support.
All right, Councilmember Edens, you're up.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to hear elaboration on the intent, which is what I thought. I think my concern is we're making this change for all mayors, including future ones, and there is the potential to certainly move up start times of work session and starting the council main meeting at 6. And although every committee is different, a lot of it's got to do with what members of the committee choose. But you'll notice that this meeting is a 6:30 meeting. So having a main council meeting regularly before that, I see could be an issue for many participants, and that was just vocalized by Councilmember Remy. My other concern is I think that there's a bit of house cleaning that we need to do. As our city attorney mentioned, this is not common to have this specific language in the charter and not in the ordinance. I guess my question for this committee is this house cleaning that we need to do this year or that we can do down the road, primarily because in the future we would be needing to pay to add this to the ballot. That would have to take place first, and then what the voters decide would initiate the additional city code change. So I guess my question is, if I remember right, didn't we say it was mostly appropriate for a municipal election and not a November election? Is that correct?
If I can answer that question, yes, we would prefer to put it when we have something already on the ballot because
Okay.
we already are paying.
So this is more than a year out.
We have some time, yes.
Yeah, and so one of the impetuses for looking at this is because before a lot of the new council members on, when we were in full quarantine, that's when the meetings were particularly short. We had less business to discuss. That's not necessarily the norm. So I think the first question is, does it need to be done? I'm at perhaps, probably, changing the charter, but I'm not necessarily happy with the phrasing in the city code. But my bigger question is, does it need to be done right now? And is this a budget priority for next year? And I don't have enough information to tell me that it's worth $10,000 to do right now. So I'm a no.
Okay. And I do have Councilmember Bertolino, you're up next.
Thank you. I am not in favor of changing this at all for the facts that Lauren just pointed out. Plus, I think it's more, for me, it's more of an agenda scheduling, agenda process than it is time. If the council is going to have a couple of very in-depth discussions on the work session that we know are going to take up some time, then don't load that schedule up with other, 4 or 5 other items. Plan on the fact that we're going to spend the full hour or more on those 2 subjects. So I don't think changing the time is going to change. What we really look at is how are we going to schedule our time that is provided based upon the agendas that we set. So I'm opposed to any changes here.
All right. I got a comment here, maybe a little bit of a compromise here. So we've got the charter that has the time hard coded, and I think the concern that Councilmember Edens brought up is a fair one, and so did Councilmember Remy about, the timing, and hopefully that the mayor is respecting those wishes of those council members. So my thinking or compromise is that the charter needs to be cleaned and, corrected in that way. So we're not hard coded, but we will still have to change the ordinance. And in the ordinance, at least then the council doesn't have to go back to voters every time to change the time. So the council by vote can change the ordinance. And the ordinance could be specified, no, whatever it is, no earlier than 6:30 or whatever time it is. But that might be a compromise. Now, what Councilmember Edens brought up is a good point. We don't have to figure this out tonight. So if anything, maybe what we could do is postpone the item. I'm happy to make a motion to postpone and then have the city attorney maybe make adjustments to see if we can do a compromise like that, where we still get the charter corrected. And again, whenever we have a ballot item on. So if it's the next municipal election, in 2022, or if we, for some reason, have something on the ballot sooner than that, say November, then we just throw it in there because we're already paying the fixed cost to be in an election. So there shouldn't be a whole added cost, but at least maybe that's a compromise I want to throw out there. But let me, before I make the motion, or at least maybe the council members have a thought here, or I know Councilmember Flasher and Rambo, you guys made the motion, so maybe you have an opinion on going down that route.
Yeah, I don't know if it's my turn or not because I made the motion, but I'm
There's no
fine
other
with the
way.
post.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm fine with the postponement completely for the reasons that you mentioned. My biggest thing is I want the flexibility to be able to start a little earlier if we have more on the agenda. Because here we are, we've been talking about the prioritizations for 2 months now, and we haven't been able to even talk about it at the meetings. And so sticking to 6 o'clock to 7, I feel like we're always in a time crunch there. So if we could start at 5:30 and then have the council meeting start at 7, that would be great. And I think that's what this is hopefully allowing us to potentially do sometime.
Just to make a point of information. So this is strictly on the start of the official council meeting time, which is 7 p.m. So the work session today can start at 4:30 if it wanted to. I think there's nothing in the charter. The city attorney, correct me, but there's nothing that hard codes the work session time. So today the mayor could have a meeting of the work session at 4:30 if he wanted.
Oh,
to.
that's great. I didn't know that. So that's a good point of information. Thank you.
But I think in those cases where we would have, maybe a half-hour work session or half-hour meeting, that's where, you can get between 6 and 7 or something. Anyway, Councilmember Rambo, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just, I'm in favor of cleaning up the charter and that whole environment and providing more flexibility in terms of scheduling the meetings and so forth. I'm sensitive to Councilmember Remy's problem. I don't know how many other council members travel from downtown, maybe several, maybe none. It's going to vary over time. And I don't want to affect them because, traffic sucks, to be honest. And, trying to fight it and get here, a half hour earlier than you easily can is hard on people. But, I don't know that we can schedule in, to accommodate everybody's time. What if we have a second shift person, or I do my best thinking after midnight, myself. And so I'd like to move them till then, but it's not going to happen. And so, again, I'm in favor of the flexibility and cleaning up the environment. I'm happy to vote in favor of postponement. But I think we have to, we have to think real hard about voting this down just because it's inconvenient for one or more of the council people, as much as I want to accommodate everyone.
Councilmember Edens, you had your hand up.
Yes, just speaking on the postponement, is it possible that Mr. Cross and City Attorney Young can just give any other potential recommendations that are out there a once over and kind of come back at the same time? It would help me understand if I was rolling this into multiple charter amendments. That makes it a better cost-effective argument. I know, for example, HPC is required to meet by charter monthly, if I believe right, but they're the only committee required to do that. So I'm not sure if there's any other house cleaning we want to do, but I would prefer to consider it at the same time, if possible. Is that reasonable to kind of come back with anything else?
I don't want to speak for City Attorney Young, but I think that's a reasonable request to if we're gonna make a change, to see if there's others to be done. So seems reasonable to me. City Attorney Young, you agree with that?
I think it's an interesting segue into one of the next topics.
Well, all right, well,
Fair.
let's get, I'll do a motion to postpone, and I'm not gonna hard code us to a date on the motion to postpone. We'll just come back when the city attorney and Steve can bring it back. So seconded by Councilmember Remy there. So we got the motion to postpone. Any other question or comments on the motion to postpone? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any oppose? Any abstain? All right, the motion to postpone passes. All right, moving on next, we have council and committee meetings in 2021. We have a virtual remote participation policy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as City Attorney Young just mentioned, good segue into that topic. Obviously, the pandemic forced us to find ways that we could have council meetings and work sessions, as well as committee meetings, as we are doing right now, virtually, because we cannot meet in person, or we can, but with significant limitations. We asked City Attorney Young to take a look at a policy that will address how, to be able to do this type of thing in a post-pandemic world as it relates to council meetings and work sessions, and how we might be able to accommodate those who might need to participate remotely, once we're back to where we, for the most part, can meet back in council chambers. So that's what this draft remote participation policy is all about. So with that, I will toss it to City Attorney Young.
Thank you, Mr. City Administrator. What you have before you today is substantially similar to what was presented at the last meeting, and it is a draft resolution. It is a remote participation policy. The intent and purpose behind this is to, well, first let me start with the regulations to which the City Council is subject, and specifically the Sunshine Law. As a City Council, under the Sunshine Law, you can attend any meeting by telephone, by video conference, by smoke signal, frankly. Haven't seen that one done yet, but I think it's possibly done. But you cannot vote by roll call. So you can't vote on an ordinance. You, in certain circumstances, could not vote on a resolution or certain appointments. So that's where this becomes important. But you can vote by roll call by video conference. The Missouri Sunshine Law was amended in 2014 or 2015 to allow for that. Now, in this pandemic, every city across the country has got a crash course in refining how they do video conferencing. And we're finding out that it can work. There are still some shortcomings, but it can work. But what we're trying to do in this policy is really address a couple of issues. First and foremost, it promotes and encourages continued physical presence. And it does so by limiting the number of people outside of the context of a pandemic. It limits the number of people, of council members, who can attend remotely. It limits the number of times per calendar year that a member can attend remotely. It also specifies and limits the reasons a council member can attend remotely. All of those are done with the intention that we are promoting and encouraging physical presence at city council meetings. A couple of other important aspects of it is that it prohibits participation in closed sessions and by the remotely participating member of closed sessions, and also in quasi-judicial proceedings. Well, the question is, okay, well, what's a quasi-judicial proceeding? And in the context of the city council, really you're going to be dealing primarily with two potential quasi-judicial hearings. One is an impeachment hearing for elected officials or for planning and zoning commission members or board of adjustment members. If one of them is to be removed subject to a hearing, the city council is acting in what's considered a quasi-judicial capacity, meaning you are there to vote and act in a almost as a judge on evidence presented to you at a hearing. Obviously, if you're participating remotely, your ability to observe and see and be present for the presentation of evidence is limited and restricted. It's the same reason right now that courts are not conducting live hearings or frankly trials. There are no trials being conducted by Zoom. And it's for these reasons. They're due process concerns, constitutional due process concerns. The second scenario would be an appeal on a conditional use permit. As you know, the process that we have right now for conditional use permits is they are approved or denied by the Planning and Zoning Commission, but there's a process by which the city council could take up a conditional use permit and review it on their own volition, or would be required to review it at the request of the applicant by filing an appeal or by a neighboring property owner by filing an appeal. And your review of that, again, is a quasi-judicial proceeding where you're there to review evidence and make decisions based on evidence presented. And there's difficulty in due process concerns in doing such remotely. So it would prohibit that type of activity. Outside of that, so we had limitation on participating remotely 3 times per year. That's the number issue. The circumstances are limited to illness or disability, employment duties outside of the city, and then or military service or other business, and then family or personal emergencies. But again, still the three times would apply. Notice would have to be provided to the city clerk 48 hours in advance. The rationale behind that requirement is to give the city sufficient time, A, to set it up, and the city then needs to be able to allow for viewing of a remote meeting and have to post it on the city's agenda. And that's part of the reason for that advance notice requirement. With that presentation, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, I've got 3 hands so far. So Councilman Rambo, you're up.
Thank you. Attorney Young, could you clarify real quickly your statement that this limits remote participation to 3 times per year? And I'm concerned about, let's say, for example, Councilmember Boat, he had some physical problems and he was unable to attend. There could be that same situation in the future. I'm looking at Dan, Joe, and Lauren, but the rest of us are old folks, more or less, and we have trouble. And if someone gets injured or sick or whatever, their mind may be sharp as a tack. They want to participate. How is that supposed to work? Can you speak to that, please?
Well, and obviously that is a policy decision for the city council to decide upon. The idea behind it, again, is simply to encourage physical presence of elected officials at the meetings. Now, in terms of, the scenario that you identified, certainly, if someone were in that position, we can carve out an exception for that. What I want to be cautious about is carving ad hoc exceptions, because when you start acting in an ad hoc way towards individuals, we start getting into potential danger areas. But I mean, we could take the limitation off completely, but the concern there is well, if we only allow 3 people to participate remotely and one person's doing it at all times, now we've got 2 that can do it. Now, that being said, this is being prepared as a resolution and you can always change it.
Right, so I would suggest, codifying the idea that if it's a medical necessity or someone is disabled for a period of time, they can have, I don't know, it's like a note from their mom or, note from the doctor or something like that to increase the number of remote attendance opportunities. I think that makes sense. At least to me, it does.
Okay.
All
Yeah,
right.
we've got medical necessity or disability as a reason for missing a meeting, but we can add in there an exception that says if there's a permanent or prolonged disability that would preclude a member from physically attending, that the limitation shall not apply.
Yeah, I just had a scary ER visit, and they thought I broke my neck, and I could have been a paraplegic, which would mean three remote meetings, and then I'm off the council, and that doesn't seem quite fair.
Well, and I want to be clear, this does not kick you off the council. It's just you don't attend the meeting. So it's not a removal from office.
No, I understand that, but I'm
Nothing
saying if I were wound up in
Okay.
a wheelchair and I were a quadriplegic, I'm not coming back from that. And I would still, my mind would need counsel as opposed to just enjoying, service. So maybe it's top of my mind because, that was a possibility a month ago. So that's it.
Sure. No, and again, I have no problem with adding that in.
All right. So we've got that comment there from Rob with a potential edit there. Councilmember Bertolino, you're up.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I was going to say exactly the same thing. For exactly the same reasons, and thinking of the late John Volpe and his condition. So maybe just some minor tweaking of the wording that says that prohibited from participating remotely more than 3 times, and then put some verbiage in there that says without consent of the council or something to that effect. When we can, without being more specific, the council can say yes, it's okay for that person to miss more than 3 meetings. I appreciate that. So I, if that's possible, I would like that. I echo what Rob said. And Rob, we are old, but we're still as sharp as a marble.
That's right. And I missed Deb. I missed Ms. Patrick when I was, naming the young folks. So I apologize for that.
All right. Councilmember Remy. You want to go ahead?
I'm sorry, if I could respond. In terms of the open-ended exception, I'm trying to avoid that because that gets into the ad hoc and we start getting into potentially into personalities. But I certainly can add a provision that provides an exemption from the limitation for any prolonged or permanent disability.
That sounds good to me.
Councilmember Remy, you're up.
Thank you. I understand the spirit behind all of this. We are amidst a pandemic right now. I don't know when we're going to come out of this pandemic. I really don't. I thought that this was going to be sooner, but every day that I'm on numerous calls, I'm unsure. I think this is a first step. I think there's a lot of issues with this document. I think that could definitely benefit from a number of different suggestions made, but in the present form, and quite frankly, with the uncertainty of the pandemic at the moment, I'm going to recommend just postponement. I think that we should wait until we get a little bit more clarity with what's going on with the scope of the world first. And at that point, then I think it's reasonable to pick this back up. So I'm going to make a motion to postpone.
Is there a second? All right, Councilmember Bertolino. All right, so we have a motion to postpone on the floor. Councilmember Edens, you're up next.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, Councilmember Remy. I guess my question goes back to the city attorney because when I read it, it sounded like that this does not supersede any stay at home or the resolution we passed. I think it was 2011 for state of emergency. So it wouldn't necessarily affect anything different for quite a while in terms of attendance. My thought is, City Attorney Young, that with these issues, I had also pegged the same thing. I have a relative, without being specific, that has leukemia, and occasionally she gets blood work, and it's been in remission, but that her blood work won't be great, and she'll be told she needs to stay at home for maybe a month. So that would be an example of a person that is still fully capable of doing the job. I think what we've just demonstrated with stay-at-home orders last spring is that we can still do the job at home. It doesn't mean we should always do the job at home. We need to be physically accessible when we can be. So my suggestion is that whatever this temporary disability is, has to be medically documented the same way it would be in a workforce. So you can't just say, I don't wear a mask because I have a disability. You actually have to prove it, right? So I digress with the mask, but the same thing that we would do in a workforce to ask for a reasonable accommodation, and it wouldn't have to, if there's a way to make it just go to the city attorney and the city administrator, if it falls under, personnel medical. I don't know that it necessarily has to be able to be sunshine requested, but it needs to come from a medical doctor. The other thing is, if that person is constantly requesting virtual for, let's say, 3 months in a row, perhaps they should not count towards the council total. In other words, you mentioned earlier, it can be a little unfair when one person's always taking that virtual spot. So maybe we need to, that one person out of 15, maybe they shouldn't count towards that limit if that's going to happen. And again, even if they provide medical documentation, still no exceptions. They need to be in person for quasi-judicial and in person for closed session. And that's just unfortunate, but is definitely has to be documented.
Okay.
That's all that, yep, that's all I got. But as to postponement, I just want to clarify, I'm not sure that we have to postpone because it sounds like it has no effect whatsoever on emergency powers. And I do want to make sure that if we come back with revisions and continue process on it, because I'd love to see the revisions, that the intent of council and of the mayor is to continue with that emergency order for remote participation.
Okay, Councilmember Remy, you're up.
Yeah, so I appreciate the Councilmember Edens. I think that there's perhaps some confusion. I do think we need to postpone this. I understand what you're saying, which is in regards to the current stay-at-home order or the current emergency procedures as delineated by the county. What I'm saying is I would not pass something such as big as this right now, irrespective of what that county is, because they could relax them. And I still don't think that it's a good idea for us to perhaps come back because we just don't know right now. And I don't want to necessarily let the county decide how we're going to proceed until we get a little bit more clarity with what the scope of this current pandemic is really going to look like. And to be honest with you, and I'm saying this, I don't say this very often. I don't know. And I think that this amount of work that City Attorney Young has done here is substantial. I think that it's okay for people to want to edit this in the interim, but I think we need to postpone this because we just don't know what's going to happen.
Just quick point of information. My understanding was that the way we wrote the resolution as a city, we would have to repeal it even if the county changed their orders, correct?
The city currently has an emergency order. It was resolution, I think 2020-22, if I recall, and it is still in effect. So City Attorney Young, maybe you can answer that. Who controls the expiration of that emergency resolution, which would, in a situation like we're using as an example, would control when we go back to normal state, which is full in-person meetings.
Sure. So two quick comments. And again, I don't have any position, on the prudence of postponing. I think that's fine. But two things. One is on the current existing resolution, my recollection is that it expires upon the governor lifting the declaration of the state of emergency. That's my recollection. In terms of the draft resolution that's presented, the idea of the resolution, as I understood it, was the direction I was given, was envision post state of emergency after this current pandemic. What kind of policy do we want to have in place? And that's what I've prepared. So in terms of Councilmember Remy's comments about do we need this now? No, because we're already doing something based upon the state of emergency. This is intended for post state of emergency. Now I have added into it, now that we're all smarter and wiser based on current circumstances, I have added into it a potential for a second pandemic, which we all hope we never see, but I've added that in there.
Well, I guess maybe I don't see any other hands up, so I'll comment and ask a question first. If hypothetically, if the governor were to lift the state of emergency in 2 months from now, then in essence, we do not have any policy or anything that can give us flexibility. And therefore, that means everyone must either attend in person or you miss a meeting. We do not have anything. So therefore, on that, I want to have something on the table ready to go because we're going to have to pass it. Otherwise, we are going to be in a period of state where we don't have anything at all. And therefore, there is no flexibility that you're hoping for because we just don't have a resolution passed. So I think it's key to have it ready. And even if it's not passed by the council, assuming that there's something, at least it would be ready to be passed, because I'm just concerned that then there isn't any anything or any alternative or any option there. So that's my opinion on that. So with the postponement, I just would like to postpone to, with the intent of tightening up the resolution, but continue to work through it so that we have it ready to go when needed. Any other hands? Councilmember Remy.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not opposed to us working as a group on this. It's not quite right for prime time, and temporally it's not right for currently what's going on right now. So I don't have any problems whatsoever. I think it's a good idea actually for us to work on a document such as this. I suspect that it's going to be a few months before we're going to be able to tackle this. And then to your point, if the governor decided tomorrow to suspend the current state of emergency, in fact, and the attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am on this point. Our mayor actually can put forth an emergency resolution at that point to be able to allow for what we would do in the city and give us the afforded time to be able to adopt something like this during that time frame.
City Attorney, that's a question for you, I guess.
I don't believe that outside of the state of emergency, because outside the state of emergency or further authorization from the city council, that the mayor could, on his own, declare a citywide emergency. There's nothing in the code that I'm aware of that would allow him to do that.
I believe that we actually authorized that over the past year to give them that authority.
There was a resolution expressly that did so, but that resolution expires once the governor rescinds the state of emergency. That's what we were referencing earlier.
Okay, I'm not sure. I hear your opinion. I'm not sure that we agree on that opinion.
I thought, and that's my recollection. I can double check that, but that is my recollection.
So, we have work to do. So if it's all right, there is a motion to postpone it, but was there a second on that? Yeah, Councilmember Arlino. So maybe just postpone it to, we'll continue to work through it. Maybe when the city attorney has it ready, just on feedback. And I think through process of iteration, we'll get it to a point where we can feel comfortable and then either have it ready on the shelf to go for council to move forward with, or we'll know more what's going on to what Ken's point is. So with that, we've got the motion to postpone. All those, any other questions or comments? All right, all those in favor of postponement, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? All right, postponement passes. All right, last item under for action there, the penalties regarding breach of executive session confidentiality.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We briefly discussed this at the last committee meeting, and City Attorney Young gave a bit of background as to why this is on the agenda and what gave rise to having the discussion about that in terms of past actions. At the last committee meeting, City Attorney Young was asked to draft some specificity with regards to penalties when there was an instance of a breach of confidentiality in an executive session. And the document that City Attorney Young is going to discuss now addresses that issue or that question that was raised at the last committee. So, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'd ask Mr. Young to take over.
Steve, what I have before you, in our prior discussions, we had talked about the concerns about releasing closed information and what the repercussions of that were. And what I've presented to you is one, a proposed charter amendment, and two, a proposed amendment to the city code. There is one primary distinction between those two, which read very similarly. The one distinction is, as I've mentioned to you before, I do not believe, it is my opinion, that the city cannot by ordinance establish a basis for forfeiture of office for an elected official. So that would require an amendment to the city charter. So the difference only comes down to what the penalty is for releasing closed information, either from a meeting or from a closed record. And the penalties are general as being sanctions as may deemed appropriate. I was asked to come up with examples of what those may be. Ones I have seen in other communities for specifically elected officials are censure. I have seen prohibiting their attendance at closed meetings or access to closed records. And I've seen those as possible sanctions. So those are ones I have seen, and also just general, lack of access to city facilities and records outside of normal operating hours. So that's what I've seen. I did want to put in here one thing I was very concerned about as I was actually dealing with closed information with third parties, is making sure that as we draft this, employees and officers that are dealing with third parties within the scope of their duties are still protected for releasing that information. So it couldn't be too strict without allowing for the capability of doing this, such as insurance counsel, auditors, things of that nature. So that's what I've presented to you. Obviously, you can act on the ordinance. The city council can act on the ordinance at any time, but the charter would require going to the voters at an election. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, I got Councilman Remy and then Edens.
I am in full support to make a motion for this. I think there's nothing more sacred than to take your job responsibilities seriously and not put the city and jeopardize anything that could potentially harm any of the workings that are important at the closed session. So I'm proud that everybody that's on this meeting today, I have no doubts that everyone here has that integrity, but I'm happy to make this motion because I do think it's important to have penalties for people that breach that vote of confidence from the public.
There's a second on that. Was that your intent, Councilmember Edens? You had your hand up, or if not, I'm going to look. I see a second.
Go for Mr. Flasher, and then I will ask a question, but I certainly don't have a problem with that motion.
Yeah, I did see Dan. So Dan will second it, and we'll come back to you, Councilmember Edens.
Yes. Okay. So one additional thought that I had. So this is on grounds for forfeiture or other appropriate sanctions, but it's just for what happens if a violation has not occurred, but there's a potential to occur, because of conflict of interest. So for example, if a current council member is not a defendant, but is a complainant against the city, can we bar them from participating in closed session? And if not, should we add it in here?
If a person, a council member, was a plaintiff against the city and was suing the city and attended a closed meeting and used that information to support or bolster or assist them in their litigation, it is my belief that they would likely be in violation of various statutes that already exist that prohibit the use of confidential information obtained in your official capacity for personal gain.
The problem is that the damage is already done because they were already allowed to attend the meeting. So it's all about punishing and cleanup, correct?
Right.
How do we
I mean,
prevent that on the field?
I would be supportive of a position. I would be supportive of a position if there was a plaintiff, and I've never run into this scenario, but if I would be supportive of a position that if a council member was suing the city and the council wished to prohibit that person from attending a closed session, I would be supportive legally of that position.
Legally, so we don't need it in a separate ordinance. That's a simple vote that council can have.
I think you can expel that person for conflict of interest on a case-by-case basis, yes.
Okie dokie, then that question's been answered, and that was my main concern, so I'm in full support of this.
All right, Councilmember Bertolino, you're up.
Yeah, a question for John. Under the provisions you've had here for it shall be grounds for disciplinary action. Let me just give a simple example. And we have a discussion within closed session, and that discussion becomes quite heated among the council members. And one council member says to another something, I don't care what it is, they say something, but it's not generally pertinent to the final resolution of what the closed session was, for why the closed session was called. All right, it was just an argument, and they got hot at each other and they yelled at each other. Now, is because that discourse occurred within the closed session, does it have the same confidentiality requirements as it would be if we, passed a final resolution or something within that closed session that was actually, it ended up in a legal document or legal action or something of that nature? Where's the line?
Well, okay. As the city attorney, I would say, my advice is just what happens in closed session stays in closed session. That's my generalized advice. Now, to specifically your question, and in the draft of the language that you have before you, it does specifically say that the record or the meeting and the content therein have to be closed consistent with Chapter 610. And it must be closed pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 610. So if some comment is made that is not appropriately closed pursuant to Chapter 610 or not germane to the reason for the closed session, I would say we would have a difficult time in enforcing that particular provision under those circumstances.
Mr. Chair,
so
if I may.
If somebody.
Go ahead, John.
I was just going to give an example. The example being, if someone decided they wanted to call me a name because they didn't like my opinion, did that name then be repeated outside of the context of that meeting? Well, of course it could, because I'm sure it was probably said before we ever went into that meeting, but still not germane to the reason we're in closed session.
Yeah, go ahead.
John, to use Councilmember Bertolino when he says, where's that line? I guess I would argue that there is no line, that whatever is said in closed session, regardless of what it is, stays in closed session within those walls. Because if we start trying to determine after the fact, well, did it do this or did it do that? I would not be comfortable with that, to be honest with you. It would be my recommendation that anybody that goes into closed session and is privy to that information, regardless of what is discussed in that room, stays in that room, no matter what it is. And I feel pretty strongly about that.
No, and that is exactly my first statement, and I agree with that. My first statement was, as the city attorney, what happens in closed session stays in closed session. And I do strongly believe that, because we don't want to start parsing out what is or isn't appropriately closed. But in terms of a technical legal answer, that was, the follow-up to that was the technical legal.
All right. I've got council members Rambo and Remy. Rob?
So censure is no deterrent to shameless people. And we have seen some pretty shameless behavior in the past. And I guess my main question is, do we need to amend both the city code and the charter? And how does that work? Because I think the penalty ought to be, I'm kind of with Councilmember Remy. There should be significant penalties for for some of these breaches. So John, can you speak to that just a little bit more fully with that in mind?
Certainly, yeah. And my reason for providing you both options wasn't necessarily for an either or. I actually envisioned that, one, you may want to do something now, which would be the ordinance amending the city code, such that knowing that the next election probably isn't going to be until April 2022, where we would put this before the voters, that you'd want to have something in the interim. And then before the April 2022 election, you could have something that would go before the voters. So it wasn't an either or, but more of a probably both.
There should be more teeth in the penalties. And it sounds as though your opinion is there's nothing we can do in an ordinance or the city code that has to be done by modifying the city charter. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. I should say, outside of the context of the laws that already exist, which would include those that are already conflict, like the existing conflict of interest statutes, the existing conflict of interest provisions in the charter, which I had identified in a prior memo.
So maybe we're covered for particularly egregious behavior, at least until we can modify the city charter. Okay, thank you.
All right, council member Remy.
Can we modify the document so that Rob's feline friend doesn't show up in all of our video conferences? Anyway, sorry.
Oh, I got lots of those.
Actually, I do have I have one question for the city attorney. And my only concern or question is are we able as a council to adopt language that also will ensure that after you cycle off council that you won't release closed session information with penalty? Because I do think that, first of all, I'm happy to take that oath today. I'm not going to reveal what happened in closed session, not going to happen. I like to make sure everybody is held to that same standard because we do represent the city during our tenure. And I treat this almost as if this was a closed settlement, for instance, in a court case. And that I'm not going to release, and either party shouldn't release anything that happens in a closed settlement. And so do we have that ability to do so in such documentation and then just allow that everybody that's on council agrees to those terms?
We can do our best to do that. I'll make that commitment. And I think we've done certain things already that are in furtherance of that goal. I think the email policy that you all worked on last year was certainly in furtherance of that goal. One of the reasons we don't typically distribute and allow council members to keep closed records is in furtherance of that goal. So yes, we can do that in a very practical way. Now, I guess the question is, can we prosecute someone for releasing closed records? Under certain circumstances, absolutely, yes, we can. And in certain circumstances, those are already provided for either in the charter or the city code.
So there's no reason then to have to modify this document as is, include an extra clause in there so that it's front and center, that everyone understands that that's what we're also maintaining.
Yeah, I do not believe we need to, because this is very specific right now for existing employees and officials. I can certainly look at a separate provision on former or anyone, misusing any information they may have received while they were in office, even though they're no longer in office. We can certainly review that.
Thank you.
All right. I do have a question, and then I want to give it to Councilmember Bertolino, because maybe that might be a question he has. But my thinking on this, I certainly agree with the wanting to have more teeth to it, but I wonder really in those situations where it's not black and white, like when there's clear, compelling evidence that someone has released information, I think it's very easy to apply. But I think we're going to run into a lot of situations where a person's going to be accused of something or an allegation is going to be made, and that person is going to have an argument. And so how do we handle that? Like, I'm sure they're going to argue for due process, and they're going to say, well, you have to prove it, and so forth. Like, that's my concern about this.
Well, and to answer your question, both your points are correct. Remember that the forfeiture process, now I will say that's only for forfeiture. For other items, it's less, but the forfeiture process is a hearing before the city council and the presentation of evidence. So if we amend the city charter and the remedy or the penalty for a violation is forfeiture, we will go through the process of the city has to prove it. It does have to be proven. Now, the city council acts as the judge, determining based on the facts whether it has been proven or not, but that can always be appealed to the circuit court. But that will be done and due process will be provided. Now, in terms of censure or a lesser penalty, that's obviously for censure, that's an opinion of the council. An opinion of the council does not require a providing of due process. And also there is in Robert's rules procedures and processes that will provide for other disciplinary type action amongst the members of the council.
Got it. Well, I do see this hopefully being more of a deterrent than us having to actually ever deal with the situation. So that's my thought. So Councilmember Bertolino, you're up. Although it looks like you may step.
Yeah, I lowered my hand. That's okay. My question was answered by John. Thank you.
Okay. So that is it. So we have a motion on the floor. Can we just repeat the motion on that? Did we lose Carla?
No, I'm on now.
Oh, there you go.
I just have it as to recommend the amendments as drafted.
Okay, but I think we might want to get a little clarity because we've got the chart, they got the code and the charter. So is that the city code or the charter route or both?
Okay, well, for now, it would be the code, right? And then proceed.
No, we've got both
Charter
drafts out
amendment
there.
would be later.
What did the makers intend? Let's just get that clarity.
As is.
You want both? city code, and then the charter. Got it. Okay. Any other questions then on the motion or?
Actually, to the chair's, sorry so to the chair's point then, so if we take the charter part off at the moment, we can adopt this immediately and not have to put it before the voters, correct? And if we have to go to the charter, we've got to then put a charter amendment. So in the interest of wanting to get this out to the public, I apologize. I will actually amend my motion to be not related to the charter, but just to council right now to the our own ordinance. And then we can deal with rectifying that against the charter in the future. But I would rather hold us to this this level of expectation now.
Okay. So would the second agree? It looks like yes, Dan. Or who was the second, by the way? Was it Dan?
I was the second, I think.
Oh, Dave. Okay.
I have Dan Lasher.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. All right. So
I'm fine with that. That's great.
all right. So we've got an agreement on that. But Rob, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just real quickly, can we make it part of the motion that we, in fact, go back and try to amend the charter as well, so that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle somehow? Because I really think we need a more substantial penalty codified into, the city charter, if that's the place it's supposed to go.
All right. Your ask is of the makers and second. So Councilmember Remy, you made the motion.
If the city attorney would oblige, if we could duplicate the current as is and have one for, and just have two separate votes at the council, one could go to the chart, one could go to the latter point and one could go to the former point. And that way we can, at least at our end, get it immediately approved, but then we can move towards the steps to getting it approved at the charter level.
That works.
Mr. Chair, if I could make a suggestion, I think what I'm hearing, and I think the intent here is to make a recommendation to the council to pass this amendment to the city code immediately, but to pass an ordinance calling for a vote to amend the charter at a time appropriate prior to the April 22 election.
I think you said it perfectly. So Maker and the second are nodding their heads in agreement. I see that thumbs up. So that's what we'll do it. Carla, you probably got that, I'm sure. So with the motion on the floor, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any oppose? Any abstain? All right, the motion passes. Perfect. All right, we are done with all our action items. We've got just a couple of not ready for action. Anything on the miscellaneous?
Mr.
All right.
Chair?
We got Councilmember Edens and interim city administrator Steve Cross. So,
I yield to City Administrator Cross.
all right, go ahead, Steve.
I wanted to point out that items not ready for action under high priority, you'll notice that number 2 is a new item, somewhat new. It's entitled Review of City Flag. Between the time that I was initially the interim and now that I'm back while I was gone in July, thereabouts of 2020, it's my understanding that a young man came before this committee, a gentleman by the name of Trey Trapani, and presented some ideas about modifying our city flag. And the mayor asked that we revisit that. And so I had asked interim deputy city administrator Julian Jacquin to meet with this young man and kind of see where things stood. So he did. He had a couple meetings with him. One of the things that Mr. Trapani did was to talk to the Wildwood Historical Society and get some information from them. He's in school. He's a young man, so there was a delay in being able to get him back. But he would be ready to come back to this committee and make a presentation in terms of what he's done and get your thoughts. So so I just wanted to mention that to see if the committee is amenable to putting this on the agenda to have that discussion with Mr. Trapani sometime in the near future.
I'm assuming just kind of looking here if there's any objections or anything. We'll Councilmember Remy, is that just a hand of agreement or you have a comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. I'm in full support of that. But could we do something also? Could we also invite a member from the Wildwood Historical Society that could also come and give the context of the current flag as it stands and give us a little background of how that flag was specifically derived, and that way we can hear that specifically directly from them, as well as entertain maybe what this gentleman's suggestion might look like.
We can make that happen, sir.
Okay. Councilmember Edens, you had your hand up.
Yes, I had a miscellaneous item, but speaking to this for just a second, I'm okay with revisiting the flag item, but I would consider moving the bias training up and maybe the social media policy first. If we have a tight agenda, I would move the flag down, and here's why. We're getting ready to have an election. We know that we will, turn over for sure one council member. And what a great time to start with new policies and new education and have that ready to go at the end of April when we bring someone new in and review for ourselves. So if we're working with really tight, agendas, I'd say that makes a lot more sense to get done now rather than to, whereas the flag can be done at any time. Certainly next meeting's fine. It's just I don't want it to be put ahead of some other things that make sense to do in a new member training time in April. And then my miscellaneous was going to be, I was hoping that the harassment policy would be sent to council for the next meeting. And my other question was for City Attorney Young. So we've now decided that there's the potential for charter amendment to have forfeiture of office for egregious behaviors with breach of executive session. Does it make sense now to also consider a charter amendment for forfeiture of office for egregious harassment of any kind, especially because someone may be convicted in court for charges, but still not, if it doesn't, well, I guess if it arose to a felony, they would have to resign. But City Attorney Young, is that something that we should consider adding?
I'm sorry, you froze during part of it, but I think I understand what the question was whether or not we should add forfeiture of office to we can look at. I have not looked at that as of yet. With knowledge that we would be able to add that in because it wasn't in the charter, but we can certainly look into that for future presentation.
It might be on my end. You cut out every other word, but I think what you said was you will look into potential additions of charter amendments for harassment, egregious behavior. Does that sound like what somebody else heard? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, Interim City Administrator Steve Cross, you got your hand up, and then I see Councilmember Rambo, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up with Councilmember Edens to get clarification with regards to raising the priority of the social media policy and the bias training. So is it your request, Councilmember Edens, that this become an item for action or for information at a future meeting, the next meeting or beyond? I'm not sure. I just want to make sure, since generally I'm the one that drafts this agenda, exactly what it is that you're looking for, and also, and perhaps. Now, I was involved in the original drafting of the social media policy that took place in my first stint as interim when we had the gentleman that we had hired to come in and draft a policy, which you may recall didn't really cover the things we wanted. So that's going to require some work. The bias training, I think that may have come up between my first time and now, and perhaps City Attorney Young, because I'm not quite sure what that topic is actually covering. But I also like, so I'd like to discuss that, what it is that we're looking for there, to find out what work I need to do, what work City Attorney Young needs to do, and then get some input from the chair in terms of where we're going to put this in the agenda.
So why don't we do this? If we can submit comments offline. Well, actually, Councilmember Edens, you're the one who'd asked about the
Yes.
bias training. Could you do that offline so that they can then
Sure.
prepare to bring it to the committee based on
To
that
answer
input?
Mr. Cross's question that he just asked, I was just thinking about getting something done through committee and moved through council so it could be done to train new members, or new policy would be in place shortly after someone is sworn in for office at the end of April,
For both of those items.
if we could do both. So, early May, we'd have something ready to go.
Okay.
Yeah, just it's easier to follow the rules when you're new, especially if you've been on here for a while, if you know what the rules are before you start your first day of job. So that would kind of be the motivation. And I will take that conversation with you, Mr. Cross, about the bias training. I can give you a call.
That would be great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Councilmember Rambo, you had your hand up, and then I see Remy.
Yeah, real quickly, this is back on the flag thing. Mr. Trapani, I listened to his presentation before. It was kind of Sheldon Cooper's Fun with Flags, which is sort of a nerd joke, but we really went around the block with it. And so I'm hoping that that Mr. Cross can ask him to have, to focus it a little bit and give us some concrete suggestions or options for the flag. I don't know that we need another, general discussion about flags and the inadequacies of our current one. So it's just a sort of a request to ask him to focus. That's it.
Councilmember, that's a very good statement. And in fact, I have seen some actual iterations of the flag that he would be presenting to the committee. He's actually drawn something up. So there will be some specific designs to look at.
Okay. Councilmember Remy, you're up then.
Since we're on the administration committee, and I hope I don't speak out of turn, I will say that one of the highlights, certainly of being a council member, is the ability to continually stay informed by phenomenal city employees that we have. And I've said this before, but I'll say it again tonight. I think that the end of week reports done by Mr. Cross are exceptional. They're in depth. And in my view, because it's the administration committee, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm going to just say this tonight. I would like to see us move forward and potentially move towards making him our city administrator without the interim title.
All right. Well, thanks for those kind words. I'm sure everybody agrees that in terms of city administrators doing a fantastic job. And I think that will be something that I hope the mayor is going to be addressing very soon. And I can follow up with him on that as well to see when we can get that addressed.
Thank you, sir.
All right. With that, then next meeting, March 2nd. So I have a motion for adjournment. Is there a motion for adjournment? I got Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Brost. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstain. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Have a good evening.
Good night.
Bye, guys.